The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers when Kina walked into my shop at midnight, still wearing her business suit like armor against the world of motor oil and rust that paid our bills. "I need you to pretend we broke up," she said, sliding her spare phone across my workbench with the same casual precision she used to close deals at her PR firm. "My ex is coming to town, and I want to see if there's still something between us." The Mustang's engine block stared at me like a mechanical witness to the end of my marriage. I wiped my hands on a shop rag, picked up her phone, and looked at my wife of 7 years. Kina stood there in her designer heels, surrounded by the tools and parts that built our life together, asking me to step aside so she could test drive her past. "Okay," I said, and walked away, forever. The rain hammered the shop's tin roof as I gathered my things. Kina watched me stuff receipts and paperwork into a duffel bag, her expression unreadable in the fluorescent light. She probably expected questions, maybe anger, certainly some kind of fight that would justify what she was about to do. Instead, I grabbed the lease folder from my office drawer. "Where are you going?" she asked when I headed for the door. "Giving you space," I replied, though we both knew I was giving her rope. The drive back to our apartment building took 15 minutes through empty streets. Mr. Feld, our building manager, was still awake, probably watching late-night television in his ground-floor unit. The old man knew everyone's business in our 12-unit complex, filed away gossip like insurance policies against future boredom. I climbed 3 flights to our place, knowing it would be the last time I called it ours. The apartment felt different already, like Kina's request had shifted the air pressure. Our wedding photos watched from the mantel as I opened my laptop and began executing the separation steps we'd postponed for months during our counseling sessions. The therapist had given us homework about communication and boundaries. Turned out Kina had been studying a different curriculum. First, I changed the mailing address on all utilities. The gas company's website made it simple, just a few clicks to redirect service notifications to my shop. The electric company required a phone call, but their automated system worked fine at midnight. Water and sewer took longer, but I had time. Next came the lease addendum. 6 months ago, when we'd renewed, I'd insisted on adding a clause that allowed either tenant to assume sole occupancy during the notice period. Kina had signed without reading, too busy with her promotion to worry about paperwork details. I uploaded the form to our property management company's portal and marked myself as the continuing resident. My phone buzzed with a text from Samir, my buddy who owned the dive bar 3 blocks away. "Late night? Shop emergency?" "Wife emergency," I typed back. "Tell you tomorrow." The inventory receipts came next. Every tool, every part, every piece of equipment in my shop was documented and photographed. Kina might think she was playing games, but I was building a fortress. When you work with your hands for 20 years, you learn that preparation prevents problems. The condition report took another hour. I walked through our apartment with my phone's camera, documenting everything from the scuffed hardwood floors to the wine stain on the kitchen wall that Kina had been nagging me to fix. Each photo got time-stamped and uploaded to cloud storage. By 3 in the morning, I had boxed my essential belongings and loaded them into my truck. The spare bedroom at the shop wasn't much, but it had a bed and a coffee maker. Everything a man needed to watch his world burn from a safe distance. Kina's spare phone sat on the kitchen counter like a black plastic confession. She'd handed it over to prevent me from texting during her weekend audition with Jasper Quaid, her college boyfriend who'd made millions in tech while I'd made an honest living with my hands. I powered it off and dropped it in my pocket. Evidence for later. The next morning brought the kind of Pacific Northwest drizzle that made everything look gray and defeated. I opened the shop early, needing the familiar comfort of work to steady my hands and quiet my mind. The Mustang restoration waited on the lift, a 1967 fastback that some rich collector wanted returned to showroom condition. Mrs. Puck from apartment 2B knocked on my shop door around 10, clutching a coffee mug and wearing the expression of someone with urgent gossip to share. Rhett, dear, I saw you leaving early this morning, she said, peering around my shoulder at the organized chaos of my workspace. Everything all right with you and Keena? Mrs. Puck had appointed herself the building's unofficial intelligence officer, a 70-year-old woman with nothing better to do than track the comings and goings of her neighbors. Most people found her annoying. I'd always considered her a valuable resource. Just giving her some space, I said, which was technically true. Well, that's probably wise. She had a visitor last night. Expensive car, very handsome man. They went upstairs around 11. The timing confirmed what I'd suspected. Jasper had arrived before Keena even asked me to disappear. The whole conversation at my shop had been theater, a performance to make her feel better about what she'd already decided. Thanks for letting me know, I told Mrs. Puck. I appreciate you looking out for us. She beamed at the recognition of her surveillance skills and shuffled back to her post. The email notification chimed on my phone at 11:47 a.m. Hotel receipt from the Grandview downtown, charged to the credit card I'd added to Keena's account for emergencies. 2 nights, premium suite, charged under Jasper Quaid's name but billed to my Visa. I stared at the screen for a long moment, watching the numbers that quantified my wife's betrayal. The receipt was time-stamped for the previous evening, which meant they'd planned this entire weekend like a military operation. The fake breakup, the spare phone, the request for space, all carefully orchestrated to give Keena plausible deniability. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd used my money to fund their reunion. I forwarded the receipt to Mr. Feld with a brief message. Unauthorized use of tenant credit card. Please document for insurance purposes. Then I forwarded it to our property management company with a longer explanation about potential lease violations and third-party liability concerns. Finally, I called the credit card company and reported the charge as unauthorized. The customer service representative was helpful and efficient, flagging the account for fraud monitoring and initiating a chargeback process. My phone rang 20 minutes later. Mr. Feld's number. Rhett, I got your email about the hotel charge. This is a serious matter. I thought you should know, I said. If someone's using my financial information without permission, it could create liability issues for the building. Absolutely right. I'll need to document this properly. Can you come by my office this afternoon? I'll be there at 2. Mr. Feld's apartment doubled as the building's management office, a cluttered space filled with lease agreements, maintenance requests, and tenant files. He poured coffee from a pot that looked older than my truck and spread the paperwork across his kitchen table. This is quite irregular, he said, reviewing the hotel receipt and my credit card statement. Your wife brought a guest to the building without proper notification, and now there's evidence of financial irregularities. I'm just trying to protect everyone involved, I said. If there are insurance implications or lease violations, I want them properly documented. Mr. Feld nodded gravely. He took his responsibilities seriously, probably because managing our building was the most important job he'd ever had. I'll need to schedule a formal review of the situation. In the meantime, I'm required to notify all parties about potential lease violations. Whatever you think is appropriate. He made notes in his careful handwriting, creating an official record of Keena's weekend adventure. Every detail would be filed and cross-referenced, turned into the kind of bureaucratic paper trail that could complicate someone's life for months. I left Mr. Feld's office feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time since Keena's midnight confession, I had a plan. The rest of the weekend passed quietly. I worked on the Mustang, organized my tools, and prepared for whatever came next. Keena's spare phone stayed powered off in my desk drawer, a silent witness to her deception. Sunday evening, I closed the joint bank account we'd maintained for household expenses. The balance wasn't huge, but it was enough to cover my shop rent for 3 months. I transferred the money to my business account and submitted the required notifications to our bank. The separation was becoming real, documented in receipts and official forms that would survive whatever story Kina decided to tell. Monday morning brought another email, this one from our property management company, acknowledging my lease addendum and confirming my status as the continuing tenant. They'd also received Mr. Feld's report about the unauthorized guest and potential financial irregularities. A formal review was scheduled for the following week. My phone rang at lunch. Kina's number. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "About what?" "About this weekend. About us. Jasper left town this morning, and I think we should reset. Put everything back the way it was." I watched rain streak the shop's windows while my wife tried to rewind the last 3 days. She sounded different, less confident than the woman who'd asked me to pretend we were broken up. "I don't think that's possible," I said. "Of course it is. We just need to talk through what happened. I know you're upset, but we can work this out." "I'm not upset, Kina. I'm done." The silence stretched between us like a canyon. When she finally spoke, her voice had the sharp edge she used on difficult clients. "You're being ridiculous. It was one weekend. Nothing even happened. The hotel receipt suggests otherwise." Another pause, longer this time. "How do you know about that?" "You used my credit card. I get notifications." "That was a mistake. Jasper was supposed to pay for everything himself." "But he didn't. He used my money to fund your reunion weekend. That's not a mistake, Kina. That's theft." "It's not theft when we're married. It's a joint account." "Was a joint account. I closed it this morning." The sound she made wasn't quite a gasp, more like air being let out of a tire. "You can't do that without my permission." "Actually, I can. Check the signature cards." I'd set up the account in my name 5 years earlier when Kina's credit was recovering from some college loan issues. She'd been added as an authorized user, not a joint owner. Another detail she'd never bothered to understand. "Rhett, you're overreacting. We can fix this." "We're not pretending anymore," I said, and hung up. The phone rang again immediately. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. I powered it off and got back to work on the Mustang. The engine was finally ready for installation, a rebuilt 289 V8 that would give the old car more power than it had ever possessed from the factory. Sometimes restoration meant making something better than it was originally. The courier arrived Tuesday morning with an envelope from our property management company. Inside was a formal notice about the lease modification, confirming my sole tenancy and requiring Kina to remove her belongings within 30 days. I called the courier service and arranged for delivery to Kina's office downtown. Then I called a locksmith. The locksmith finished changing our apartment locks at 2 in the afternoon, just as Kina's BMW pulled into the parking lot 3 stories below. I watched from the window as she climbed out of her car, moving with the quick, angry steps of someone who'd spent the morning learning that legal paperwork trumps emotional manipulation. Her key didn't work, of course. She tried it 3 times before pulling out her phone, probably calling me. My phone stayed silent in my pocket, still powered off from yesterday's conversation. After a few minutes, she marched to Mr. Feld's office, her heels clicking against the concrete like gunshots. I could hear their voices through the building's thin walls, Kina's rising in pitch as Mr. Feld explained the situation with bureaucratic precision. Words like lease violation and unauthorized charges drifted up through the heating vents, mixed with Kina's increasingly desperate protests. 20 minutes later, she was back in the parking lot, this time with Mr. Feld trailing behind her like a reluctant witness. He unlocked the building's front door and escorted her upstairs, maintaining the formal distance of someone following proper procedures. They knocked on what used to be our door. I opened it wearing my work clothes, grease still under my fingernails from the morning's engine work. Kina looked like she'd stepped out of a business magazine, all sharp angles and expensive fabric, completely out of place in the hallway that smelled like old carpet and other people's cooking. "We need to discuss this situation," Mr. Feld said, consulting his clipboard like a script. There seems to be some confusion about the lease arrangements. No confusion, I said. The addendum is clear. Single occupancy during notice period, which I filed Monday morning. Keena's face went through several expressions before settling on the controlled anger she used during difficult negotiations. This is insane, Rhett. You can't just lock me out of my own home. It's not your home anymore. Check the paperwork. Mr. Feld cleared his throat. Perhaps we should all sit down and review the documents together. I stepped aside to let them enter. The apartment looked different with my belongings gone, emptier but somehow more honest. Keena's things dominated the space now, her books, her artwork, her carefully curated collection of objects that projected success and sophistication. The lease modification is legally valid, Mr. Feld explained, spreading papers across the coffee table. Mr. Vossen filed the proper notices and provided required documentation. However, Mrs. Vossen has 30 days to remove her personal property. This is my apartment too, Keena said. I've lived here for 3 years. As an authorized occupant, not a leaseholder, I corrected. There's a difference. She turned to face me fully, and I saw something I'd never seen in 7 years of marriage. Genuine fear. Not of me, but of losing control of the situation. What do you want? She asked. I want you to understand that actions have consequences. Because of one weekend? Because I wanted to see an old friend? Because you asked me to pretend we were broken up so you could cheat on me with your ex-boyfriend using my credit card to pay for the hotel room. Mr. Feld made a note on his clipboard. The financial irregularities are part of the formal review process. Keena's composure cracked slightly. It wasn't cheating. We were on a break. A break you engineered specifically to avoid calling it cheating. That's not how it happened. Then explain how it happened. She looked around the apartment like the walls might provide better answers than her memory. Jasper contacted me last month, said he was coming to town and wanted to catch up. I thought it would be easier if you weren't, if I wasn't what? If you weren't around to complicate things. The honesty was refreshing, even if it confirmed everything I'd suspected. Keena had wanted me gone not to spare my feelings, but to avoid the inconvenience of my presence during her reunion with Jasper. So you asked me to pretend we were broken up. I asked you to give me space, to sleep with another man, to figure out my feelings, using my money. She didn't have an answer for that one. Mr. Feld gathered his papers with the efficiency of someone who'd witnessed too many domestic disputes. I'll leave you both to work out the personal details. Mrs. Vossen, you have until the end of the month to collect your belongings. Mr. Vossen, please provide reasonable access for that purpose. After he left, Keena and I sat in silence for several minutes. The apartment felt like a stage set after the play had ended, all props and no purpose. I made a mistake, she finally said. Which part was the mistake? Asking me to disappear or getting caught? All of it. The whole thing was stupid and selfish, and I'm sorry. Sorry you did it, or sorry it didn't work out the way you planned? She considered the question longer than I expected. Both, I guess. At least you're honest about that much. Can we fix this? Can we try again? I looked at my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, sitting in the apartment she was about to lose, asking if we could pretend the last week hadn't happened. She was beautiful, successful, intelligent, and completely incapable of understanding why her actions had consequences. No, I said, we can't. Because of your pride? Because you're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you got caught. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Sometimes the truth was too obvious to deny. I'll need time to find a new place, she said. You have 30 days. And after that? After that, you'll have a new place, and I'll have my life back. She gathered her purse and car keys, moving with the careful dignity of someone trying not to fall apart in public. At the door, She turned back one last time. This isn't over, Rhett. Yes, it is. After she left, I walked through the apartment one more time, making sure I hadn't missed anything important. The wedding photos still watched from the mantel, but they looked different now, like evidence from someone else's life. I packed them in a box and carried it down to my truck. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. Divorce lawyers, insurance companies, bank representatives, all the bureaucratic machinery that turns a marriage into a legal footnote. Each conversation added another layer of documentation to the wall I was building between my old life and whatever came next. Keena tried calling several times, but I let everything go to voicemail. Her messages started angry, progressed through bargaining, and eventually settled into the kind of cold professionalism she used with difficult clients. By Thursday, she'd hired her own lawyer. Friday afternoon, Samir stopped by the shop with beer and the kind of grim satisfaction that comes from watching someone else's drama unfold. "Heard through the grapevine that your wife's been telling people you had a nervous breakdown," he said, settling onto a milk crate that served as my office's guest chair. "What kind of nervous breakdown? The kind where you lock her out of her apartment and steal her money because you can't handle her success?" I popped open a beer and considered Keena's version of events. It was clever, really, casting me as the unstable husband who'd snapped under pressure rather than the wronged party seeking justice. "She's good at her job," I admitted. "Too good, maybe. Word is she's been working this angle all week, trying to get ahead of whatever story you might tell." "I'm not telling any stories." "That might be the problem. In a PR war, silence looks like guilt." Samir had a point. While I'd been focused on legal documentation and proper procedures, Keena had been managing the narrative, shaping public opinion before I even realized there was a battle for hearts and minds. "What would you do?" I asked. "Me? I'd make sure people knew the truth, but I'd be smart about it." "Meaning?" "Meaning you don't fight a PR professional with amateur hour tactics. You fight fire with fire." That evening, I powered on Keena's spare phone for the first time since she'd handed it to me. The device came alive with a cascade of notifications, missed calls, text messages, social media alerts, a complete record of her weekend activities, preserved in digital amber. The text thread with Jasper was particularly illuminating. Messages dating back 6 weeks, planning their reunion with the kind of detail usually reserved for military operations. Hotel reservations, restaurant choices, even a discussion about the best way to handle Rhett during their time together. One message stood out. "Just tell him you need space. Men always fall for that." Another, "Make sure he's not around when I arrive. This needs to be clean." And finally, "Don't worry about the hotel. I'll put it on his card and pay him back later. He'll never notice." Except Jasper hadn't paid me back. The credit card charge was still there, a $800 monument to their weekend together. I screenshot everything and uploaded the images to a secure folder, evidence for later. Saturday morning brought unexpected visitors. Keena's parents, driving up from Portland in their spotless Cadillac, armed with the kind of righteous indignation that only comes from hearing one side of a complicated story. "Rhett, we need to talk," Keena's father announced when I opened the shop door. Robert Henley was a retired insurance executive who'd spent 40 years believing that every problem could be solved with the right paperwork and enough persistence. "Morning, Bob. Linda." I nodded to Keena's mother, who stood behind her husband like backup in a business suit. "Keena told us what happened," Linda said. "This whole situation is getting out of hand." "Which situation is that?" "You locking her out of her home," Bob said. "Stealing her money, having some kind of breakdown because she wanted to see an old friend." I wiped my hands on a shop rag and gestured toward my makeshift office. "Come on in. Let's talk about what really happened." They followed me inside, looking uncomfortable among the tools and car parts that represented everything they'd hoped their daughter would escape by marrying someone with better prospects than a mechanic. "Keena made a mistake," Linda said once we were seated. She admits that. But this vindictive behavior isn't like you. What would be like me? Forgiveness, Bob said. Understanding. Working things out like adults. Did she mention that she used my credit card to pay for her hotel room with Jasper? They exchanged glances. She said there was a misunderstanding about expenses. Did she mention that she asked me to pretend we were broken up so she could sleep with him without technically cheating? Another glance, less confident this time. Did she mention that this whole thing was planned 6 weeks in advance down to the specific lies she was going to tell me? How could you possibly know that? Linda asked. I pulled out Keena's spare phone and showed them the text thread with Jasper. They read in silence, their expressions shifting from skepticism to confusion to something approaching horror. She gave me this phone to prevent me from texting during their weekend together, I explained. Didn't occur to her that it contained a complete record of their planning. Bob set the phone down like it might explode. This doesn't look good. No, it doesn't. But you could still work things out, Linda said, though her voice lacked conviction. People make mistakes. Marriage is about forgiveness. Marriage is about trust, I corrected, and honesty, and not using your spouse's money to fund affairs with your ex-boyfriend. They stayed for another hour, but the conversation was over. Keena's parents left with the defeated air of people who'd arrived expecting to solve a simple misunderstanding and discovered something much more complicated. That afternoon, I called my lawyer with an update. The phone records will be useful, she said. Premeditation makes this a much stronger case for fraud. I don't want to destroy her. I just want out. Sometimes those are the same thing. Sunday evening, Keena showed up at the shop alone. She looked tired, older somehow, like the week had aged her in ways that expensive skincare couldn't fix. Can we talk? She asked. We are talking. I mean really talk, about what happens next. I gestured toward the office, and she followed me inside, moving carefully among the tools and equipment like someone navigating a foreign country. My parents came to see you, she said. They did. They told me about the phone, about the messages. I figured they would. She sat down on the milk crate Samir had occupied the day before, looking incongruous in her weekend casual clothes among the automotive chaos. I know how it looks, she said. How does it look? Like I planned the whole thing. Like I manipulated you. Didn't you? Not the way you think. It wasn't about hurting you. It was about, I don't know. Curiosity, maybe. Wondering what might have been. And now you know. Now I know it was a mistake. Jasper isn't the person I remembered. The whole weekend was awkward and disappointing and stupid. But you did it anyway. But I did it anyway. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain on the shop's metal roof. 7 years of marriage reduced to a conversation in a garage, surrounded by the tools that had built our life together. What do you want from me? She finally asked. Nothing. There has to be something, some way to make this right. You can't make it right, Keena. You can only make it over. Meaning? Meaning we sign the papers, split our assets, and move on with our lives. No drama, no revenge, no attempts to rewrite history. And if I don't agree? Then we do it the hard way. Lawyers, depositions, forensic accountants, all the messy details spread across public records for everyone to see. She understood the threat. Her career depended on maintaining a certain image, and a contentious divorce filled with accusations of fraud and infidelity wouldn't enhance her professional reputation. I'll need time to find a place, she said. You have 3 weeks left. And after that? After that, we're strangers who used to know each other. She nodded slowly, accepting the reality of her situation. At the door, she turned back one last time. For what it's worth, I really am sorry. I know you are. Does that matter at all? It matters, but it doesn't change anything. After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking about the conversation and what it meant. Kina was sorry, genuinely sorry, but she was sorry about the consequences, not the choices. She regretted getting caught, not the betrayal itself. That was the difference between remorse and regret, and it was why our marriage was truly over. The Mustang waited on the lift, its restored engine gleaming under the shop lights. Tomorrow I would finish the installation and move on to the next project. There was always another car to fix, another problem to solve with patience and the right tools. Some things could be restored to better than new. Others were just broken. 2 weeks after Kina moved out, I discovered she'd been busy rewriting our story for public consumption. The revelation came courtesy of Mrs. Puck, who knocked on my shop door with coffee and the eager expression of someone carrying premium gossip. "Rhett, dear, I thought you should know what people are saying," she began, settling into her favorite position near the window where she could watch the street while talking. "What are people saying?" "Well, I was at the grocery store yesterday, and I ran into that woman from Kina's office, Talia something, very pretty, very well dressed. I knew Talia Morrison from company parties, Kina's closest friend and fellow PR executive, ambitious and sharp-tongued in the way that passed for sophisticated in their industry. She was telling everyone within earshot about your breakdown," Mrs. Puck continued, "how you couldn't handle Kina's success, so you snapped and threw her out of her own apartment." "Her own apartment?" "According to Talia, Kina's been paying all the bills for years while you struggled to keep your little shop afloat. Said you got jealous when her old boyfriend came to visit, so you changed the locks and stole her money." I set down the carburetor I'd been rebuilding and gave Mrs. Puck my full attention. "What else did she say?" "Oh, she was just getting started. Apparently, you've been emotionally abusive for years, controlling Kina's finances and isolating her from her friends. The hotel incident was just you finally showing your true colors." "The hotel incident?" "Where you used Kina's credit card without permission and then accused her of cheating when she tried to help a friend in need." The story was impressive in its completeness, a masterful inversion of facts that cast Kina as the victim and me as the unstable abuser. Every detail had been carefully crafted to sound plausible while obscuring the truth. "Did anyone believe her?" I asked. Mrs. Puck snorted. "I've been watching you two for 3 years, dear. I know who pays the bills and who comes home drunk from office parties, but most people don't have my advantages." "Your advantages?" "A front row seat and nothing better to do than pay attention." After Mrs. Puck left, I spent the afternoon thinking about Kina's narrative strategy. She was doing what any good PR professional would do when faced with a crisis, getting ahead of the story, controlling the message, and positioning herself as the sympathetic party before anyone could hear my side. It was smart, effective, and completely infuriating. That evening, I called Samir and asked him to meet me at his bar. The Anchor was the kind of place where working people went to drink away the day's frustrations, dimly lit and honest in a way that Kina's world never was. "You look like someone who's been thinking too hard," Samir said, sliding a beer across the scarred wooden bar. "Kina's been busy." "Heard about that. Word is you're some kind of controlling monster who couldn't handle having a successful wife." "You believe that?" "I believe Kina's good at her job. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" I took a long drink and considered my options. I could ignore the rumors and hope they faded, but that seemed unlikely given Kina's professional skills. I could try to tell my side of the story, but who would listen? Or I could fight back using the same tools she was using against me. "What would it take to set the record straight?" I asked. "Depends on what kind of record you want to set. You looking for justice or revenge?" "What's the difference?" "Justice is about making things fair. Revenge is about making things hurt." I thought about that distinction while finishing my beer. Justice would be people knowing the truth about what happened. Revenge would be making sure Kina paid a price for her deception. "Can't I have both?" Samir grinned. Now you're talking my language. The next morning, I powered up Keena's spare phone again and spent 2 hours documenting everything. Screenshots of her messages with Jasper, copies of the hotel receipts, photos of the credit card statements. I organized it all into a timeline that told the real story of our marriage's end. Then I created a simple website. Nothing fancy, just a basic page with the facts laid out in chronological order. The domain name was neutral, therealstory2024.com, and the content was straightforward. No editorial commentary, no emotional appeals, just documents and dates that spoke for themselves. I didn't promote the site or send it to anyone. I just made sure it would appear in search results for anyone looking up information about Keena Vossen or our divorce. The internet was forever, and the truth deserved a permanent address. 2 days later, Talia Morrison showed up at my shop. She arrived in a silver BMW that probably cost more than I made in a year, dressed in the kind of outfit that announced her importance to anyone paying attention. Everything about her presentation screamed success, from her designer handbag to her perfectly styled hair. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "About what?" "About the website." "What website?" "Don't play games, Rhett. You know exactly what I'm talking about." I gestured toward my office, and she followed me inside, moving carefully in heels that weren't designed for garage floors. "Keena's been getting calls," she said once we were seated. "Clients asking questions about her personal life. It's affecting her business. That's unfortunate. It's vindictive, and it needs to stop. I'm not sure what you want me to do about it. Take down the website. Stop spreading lies about Keena's private life." "What lies?" "You know what lies." I pulled out my laptop and navigated to the site. "Show me which part is false." Talia studied the screen for several minutes, her expression growing more frustrated as she read. Everything was documented with timestamps and screenshots. There was nothing to dispute because it was all true. "This is private information," she finally said. "Personal messages that were never meant to be public. Messages from a phone that Keena gave me. That doesn't give you the right to publish them." "Actually, it does. Check the terms of service on the phone plan. I'm an authorized user with full access to all content." "You're destroying her reputation." "I'm documenting what happened. If that destroys her reputation, maybe she should have thought about that before planning a 6-week affair behind my back." Talia leaned forward, switching from legal threats to personal appeal. "Look, I know you're hurt. Keena made mistakes and she knows that. But this website isn't helping anyone. It's helping me." "How?" "It's making sure people know the truth." "Whose truth? Your version of events?" "The version supported by documentary evidence." She sat back, recognizing that emotional manipulation wasn't going to work any better than legal intimidation. "What do you want?" "I want people to stop saying I'm an abusive husband who had a breakdown because his wife was successful. And if that stops, then maybe the website becomes less relevant. You're blackmailing her." "I'm correcting the record." Talia gathered her purse and stood to leave. "This isn't over." "It is for me." After she left, I called my lawyer to make sure I was on solid legal ground. The website contained only factual information that I had legitimate access to, presented without commentary or interpretation. It might be embarrassing for Keena, but it wasn't illegal. "Just be careful," my lawyer warned. "Public relations wars have a way of escalating beyond what anyone expects." That afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. A woman's voice, professional but friendly. "Mr. Vossen, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. I'm working on a story about social media and divorce, and I was hoping to speak with you about your recent experiences. I'm not interested in being on television. I understand completely, but I've seen your website, and I think you might have an important perspective on how personal disputes play out in the digital age." "My website?" "therealstory2024.com. It's a fascinating case study in how ordinary people can use technology to fight back against character assassination. I hadn't expected media attention, but I probably should have. In an age where everything was content, a well-documented marital dispute was bound to attract interest from journalists looking for stories about modern relationships and social media warfare. "I'll think about it," I told her. "Take your time, but if you change your mind, I think people would benefit from hearing your side of the story." That evening, I sat in my shop office thinking about how quickly things had escalated. What started as a simple desire to correct false rumors had become something larger and more complicated. The website was generating attention I hadn't anticipated, and that attention was creating new pressures for everyone involved. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Take down the website or face the consequences." I screenshot the message and added it to my growing collection of evidence. If Kina wanted to play hardball, I was ready for that game. But first, I needed to understand what the consequences might be. The next morning brought answers in the form of a certified letter from a downtown law firm I'd never heard of. Inside was a cease and desist order demanding that I remove all defamatory content from my website and cease all harassment of their client. The letter was signed by someone named Marcus Hoffman, attorney at law, and it was filled with the kind of legal language designed to intimidate people who couldn't afford their own lawyers. I called my attorney. "It's a standard intimidation tactic," she explained after reviewing the letter. "They're hoping you'll panic and comply without understanding your rights." "What are my rights?" "To publish factual information that you obtained legally. They'd have to prove defamation, which means proving that something you posted was false. Based on what I've seen, that's going to be difficult." "So I ignore it?" "You respond through me. Let them know you're represented and that you're confident in your legal position." "And then?" "Then we see what they do next." What they did next was escalate. The following week, I arrived at my shop to find a city inspector waiting with a clipboard and an attitude. He spent 3 hours going through every inch of my business, looking for code violations and safety infractions with the thoroughness of someone who expected to find problems. "Everything seems to be in order," he admitted grudgingly after completing his inspection. "But I'll be back for a follow-up in 30 days. "What prompted the inspection?" I asked. "Anonymous complaint about potential hazardous materials storage." I knew it wasn't anonymous. Someone with connections had made a phone call, and now I was dealing with bureaucratic harassment designed to make my life difficult. 2 days later, the fire marshal showed up. Then the zoning inspector. Then someone from the EPA who wanted to examine my waste oil disposal procedures. Each inspection was legitimate, professional, and completely unnecessary. My shop had been operating in compliance with all regulations for 15 years, and nothing had changed except my marital status and my willingness to document my ex-wife's infidelity. The message was clear: shut down the website or be buried under endless bureaucratic obstacles. I called my lawyer again. "This is harassment," I said. "They're using city agencies to intimidate me." "Can you prove it?" 5 inspections in 1 week? That's not a coincidence. "Probably not, but proving coordination between your ex-wife's legal team and city officials would be difficult and expensive." "So what are my options?" "Comply with their demands, or prepare for a long fight." "What would you do?" "I'd fight, but I'd be smart about it." That evening, I sat in Samir's bar thinking about smart ways to fight people with more money and connections than I had. The beer tasted bitter, and the familiar comfort of the place felt less comforting than usual. "You look like someone who's been thinking too hard again," Samir observed. "Kina's bringing out the heavy artillery." "How heavy?" I told him about the inspections, the legal threats, and the escalating pressure campaign designed to make me fold. "Sounds like you got their attention," he said. "That was the idea. Question is, what are you going to do now that you have it?" I finished my beer and considered my options. I could give up, take down the website, and accept whatever narrative Kina wanted to tell about our marriage. Or I could double down and see how far this war was willing to go. I'm going to finish what she started, I said. Meaning? Meaning if she wants to play dirty, I'll show her what dirty really looks like. Samir grinned and poured me another beer. Now we're talking. The next morning, I expanded the website. The expanded website went live at 6 a.m, just as Kina would be starting her daily routine of coffee and industry news. I'd spent the previous evening adding new sections, a timeline of the bureaucratic harassment, copies of the anonymous inspection complaints, and a detailed analysis of how someone might use city connections to intimidate a private citizen. I called it the anatomy of a smear campaign, and I documented everything with the same methodical precision I used to rebuild engines. By noon, my phone was ringing. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The voice belonged to Marcus Hoffman, the lawyer who'd sent the cease and desist letter. "Exercising my First Amendment rights. You're making serious accusations without proof. I'm documenting a pattern of behavior and letting readers draw their own conclusions. This is harassment, and it needs to stop. I agree. Tell your client to call off her dogs, and I'll have nothing left to document. You don't understand who you're dealing with. A woman who cheated on her husband and is now trying to destroy him for refusing to stay quiet about it." The line went silent for several seconds. When Hoffman spoke again, his voice had the careful tone of someone choosing words for a recording. "Mr. Vossen, I strongly advise you to seek legal counsel before this situation escalates further. Already have counsel. She says I'm on solid ground. We'll see about that." The call ended, and I went back to work on a transmission rebuild. There was something soothing about mechanical problems. They had clear causes and logical solutions, unlike the human complications that had taken over my life. That afternoon brought unexpected visitors. 2 men in expensive suits who looked like they'd stepped out of a corporate boardroom, both carrying briefcases and the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word no. "Mr. Vossen? I'm David Chen from Meridian Consulting. This is my associate, Tom Bradley. We'd like to discuss a business proposition." I wiped my hands and gestured toward my office, curious about what kind of business proposition required 2 consultants in $1,000 suits. "We represent certain interests in the local business community," Chen began once we were seated. "Interests that value discretion and mutual cooperation." "What kind of interests?" "The kind that understand how damaging public disputes can be for everyone involved." Bradley opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "We're prepared to offer you a very generous settlement in exchange for your agreement to cease all public commentary about your recent divorce." "How generous?" $200,000. Cash. No strings attached except your silence." I stared at the number written on the contract they'd placed on my desk. It was more money than my shop made in 3 years. Enough to pay off every debt and buy equipment I'd only dreamed about. "Who's paying?" "That's confidential," Chen said. "But the offer is legitimate, and the funds are available immediately." "What happens if I say no?" "Nothing happens," Bradley said. "We simply explore other options for resolving this situation." "What other options?" "Legal remedies, regulatory solutions, market-based approaches to reducing conflict." The euphemisms were polite, but the message was clear. Take the money or face escalating pressure until I broke. "I need time to think about it," I said. "Of course, but the offer expires in 72 hours. After they left, I sat in my office staring at the contract. $200,000 to shut up and disappear. It was tempting. Almost irresistibly so, but something about the offer bothered me beyond the obvious attempt at bribery. If Kina's side was willing to pay that much for my silence, what were they really afraid of? I called my lawyer and described the meeting. "That's a substantial offer," she said. "You should consider it carefully." "You think I should take it?" "I think you should understand what you're turning down if you refuse. This kind of money suggests they're very motivated to end this dispute. or very afraid of what might come out if it continues. That's possible too. The question is whether you're prepared for what comes next, if you say no. That evening, I met Samir at his bar to discuss the offer. The place was busier than usual, filled with the kind of people who worked with their hands and paid their own bills, the opposite of the suit-wearing consultants who'd visited my shop. 200 grand is serious money, Samir said after I explained the situation. It is. Life-changing money for someone in your position. Probably. So why do you look like someone who's already decided to turn it down? I thought about that question while watching the other customers. These were people who understood the value of hard work and honest dealing, who wouldn't respect someone who sold his integrity for any price. Because if I take their money, they win, I said finally. And if you don't take it, then we find out what they're really afraid of. Samir nodded approvingly. I was hoping you'd say that. The next morning, I called the number Chen had given me and declined their offer. The conversation was brief and professional, but I could hear the disappointment in his voice. Are you certain about this decision? He asked. Completely certain. Then I hope you're prepared for the consequences. I'm prepared for whatever comes next. We'll see. The consequences began that afternoon. I was working under the hood of a customer's truck when my phone rang. The caller ID showed the number for my bank. Mr. Vosin, this is Rebecca Martinez from First National. I'm calling about some irregularities in your business account. What kind of irregularities? We've received reports of potential money laundering activities associated with your account. I'm afraid we're required to freeze all assets pending a federal investigation. Money laundering? That's ridiculous. I understand your concern, but we have to follow federal banking regulations. The freeze will remain in place until the investigation is complete. How long will that take? These things can take months, sometimes longer. After the call ended, I sat in my office trying to process what had just happened. My business account was frozen, which meant I couldn't pay suppliers, employees, or rent. Without access to operating capital, I'd be forced to close within weeks. It was a masterful move, surgical in its precision. No violence, no obvious illegality, just bureaucratic machinery grinding me into powder. I called my lawyer immediately. This is serious, she said after I explained the situation. Money laundering investigations are federal matters. Even if the allegations are baseless, it could take months to resolve. Can you do anything? I can file motions, but federal banking regulations give them broad authority to freeze accounts during investigations. So I'm just supposed to wait? Unless you can prove the investigation was initiated in bad faith, yes. How would I prove that? You'd need evidence of coordination between the people pressuring you and the agencies conducting the investigation. That's almost impossible to obtain. Almost impossible, but not completely impossible. That evening, I drove to Mrs. Puck's apartment and knocked on her door. She answered wearing a housecoat and the eager expression of someone hoping for interesting news. Rhett, dear, what a pleasant surprise. Come in, come in. Her apartment was exactly what I'd expected, neat, comfortable, and positioned to provide maximum surveillance opportunities. The living room window offered a perfect view of the building's entrance and parking lot. I need a favor, I said. Of course, dear. What can I do for you? I need you to keep track of anyone unusual who visits the building, people who don't live here, especially anyone who looks like government officials or lawyers. Are you in some kind of trouble? The kind of trouble that comes from telling the truth about powerful people. Mrs. Puck's eyes lit up with the excitement of someone being recruited for an important mission. What should I look for? Anyone asking questions about me or my business. Anyone who seems to be conducting surveillance. Anyone who doesn't belong. I can do that. Should I take pictures? If you can do it safely. Oh, I have a very good camera. Digital with a telephoto lens. My grandson taught me how to use it. I left Mrs. Puck's apartment feeling slightly more optimistic. If Keena's people were coordinating with government agencies, they'd have to communicate somehow, and communication left traces. The next morning brought another inspection. this time from the Department of Labor. They wanted to review my employee records, safety protocols, and workers' compensation insurance. It was the sixth inspection in 2 weeks, and the inspector seemed surprised to find everything in perfect order. "This is quite unusual," he admitted after completing his review. The complaint suggested serious violations. What kind of complaint? Anonymous tip about unsafe working conditions and potential labor law violations. Everything look unsafe to you? He glanced around my shop, taking in the organized tool storage, clearly marked safety equipment, and properly maintained machinery. Actually, this is one of the cleanest operations I've seen. Then maybe someone's filing false complaints. That's possible. You might want to document these inspections, just in case there's a pattern of harassment. After he left, I updated the website with details of the latest inspection and the frozen bank account. I was careful to stick to facts and avoid speculation, but the pattern was becoming obvious to anyone paying attention. That afternoon, my phone rang. Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. "Mr. Vossen, I've been following your story online. Would you be willing to do an interview about what's been happening?" "What kind of interview?" "A chance to tell your side of the story. I think people would be interested in how personal disputes can escalate into something much larger." I thought about the offer while watching traffic through my office window. Television would amplify everything, making the dispute public in a way that couldn't be ignored or suppressed. "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow afternoon, if you're available." "I'll be here." The interview aired 2 days later during the evening news. Jennifer Walsh had done her homework, presenting a balanced overview of the situation while letting the documented evidence speak for itself. The segment included shots of my shop, excerpts from the website, and my explanation of how a simple divorce had escalated into what looked like organized harassment. This appears to be a case where someone's refusal to stay quiet about infidelity has triggered a coordinated response designed to silence them, Walsh concluded. The question viewers might ask is whether this kind of pressure campaign represents justice or something more troubling. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone rang constantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and people who'd experienced similar situations. The website's traffic increased by thousands of %, and social media picked up the story with the viral intensity that characterized modern information warfare. By the next morning, The Real Story 2024 was trending on Twitter, and news outlets across the region were covering what they called the divorce war that exposed everything. Keena's carefully constructed narrative was collapsing under the weight of documented evidence and public scrutiny. That afternoon, Marcus Hoffman called again. "You've made a serious mistake," he said without preamble. "Which mistake is that?" "Going public. This was a private matter that could have been resolved quietly. It stopped being private when your client started filing false complaints with city agencies. You can't prove that." "Actually, I think I can." The line went quiet. When Hoffman spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "What do you want?" "I want the harassment to stop. I want my bank account unfrozen. And I want a public apology for the false allegations." "That's not going to happen." "Then I guess we'll see how this plays out in the court of public opinion. You're making enemies you can't afford to have. I'm exposing corruption that shouldn't exist. This isn't over." "No, it's not." But I could hear something new in his voice, uncertainty, maybe even fear. The balance of power was shifting, and everyone involved knew it. That evening, Mrs. Puck knocked on my shop door with a manila envelope and the satisfied expression of someone who'd completed an important mission. "I got them," she announced, setting the envelope on my workbench. "Got who?" "The people who've been watching your building. I have photographs." Inside the envelope were dozens of digital prints showing well-dressed individuals entering and leaving our building over the past 2 weeks. Some were clearly government inspectors, but others looked like private investigators or consultants. "This one's interesting," Mrs. Puck said. pointing to a photo of two men in suits talking near the building's entrance. I saw them 3 different times, always with clipboards, always asking questions about you. Did you hear what they were asking? Oh yes, dear. They wanted to know about your business practices, your personal habits, whether you had any problems with drinking or gambling. Very thorough questions. What did people tell them? Mostly that you were quiet, hard-working, and minded your own business. But they seemed disappointed with those answers. The photographs were exactly the kind of evidence I'd hoped to find. Proof that the investigation wasn't random bureaucratic oversight, but a coordinated effort to build a case against me. I uploaded the best images to the website, along with a detailed analysis of the surveillance pattern. Within hours, the story had evolved again, this time focusing on the use of private investigators and government agencies to harass a private citizen. My phone rang at midnight. Unknown number. "You need to stop," a woman's voice said. "This has gone far enough." "Who is this?" "Someone who's trying to help you understand the situation you're in." "What situation is that?" "You're fighting people with resources you can't imagine. Money, connections, influence. They can make your life very difficult. They already have. This is nothing compared to what they can do if you keep pushing. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. Take down the website, stop talking to reporters, and this all goes away." "And if I don't?" "Then you'll discover what happens to people who don't know when to quit." The line went silent, leaving me alone in my shop with the sound of rain on the metal roof and the weight of decisions that would determine everything that came next. I looked around at the tools and equipment that represented 20 years of honest work, at the projects waiting for completion, at the life I'd built with my own hands. Then I looked at the computer screen showing my website, the digital monument to truth that had started this war. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new pressure, new attempts to break my resolve. But tonight, I had a choice to make about who I wanted to be and how far I was willing to go to defend it. I opened a new page on the website and began typing, "The Midnight Threat. How intimidation tactics reveal desperation. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one they'd never forget." The Midnight Threat turned out to be the last mistake Keena's people would make. By documenting the anonymous call and adding it to the website, I'd crossed a line that transformed everything from a personal dispute into a public interest story about corruption and intimidation. The next morning brought a call from the FBI. "Mr. Vossen, this is Special Agent Patricia Williams. I'd like to discuss some of the allegations you've posted online regarding potential abuse of government resources." "I'm happy to cooperate. Can you meet me at our field office this afternoon? I'd like to review your documentation and discuss the pattern of harassment you've described." The FBI field office was a glass and steel monument to federal authority, all security checkpoints and serious-faced agents who looked like they'd never smiled in their lives. Agent Williams was different, professional but approachable, with the kind of direct manner that suggested she'd dealt with complicated situations before. "I've reviewed your website," she said once we were seated in a sterile conference room. "The pattern you've documented is concerning." "Concerning how?" "Multiple federal and local agencies conducting simultaneous investigations of a single individual without apparent coordination or justification. That suggests either remarkable coincidence or something more troubling." I spread my documentation across the table: inspection reports, bank records, photographs from Mrs. Puck's surveillance, timestamps showing the coordination between different agencies. "This is impressive work," Agent Williams said after reviewing everything. "You've documented what appears to be a systematic campaign of harassment using government resources. Can you do anything about it?" "We can investigate. If we find evidence of corruption or abuse of authority, we can prosecute." "How long will that take?" "Depends on what we find. But in the meantime, I can make some calls that might resolve your immediate problems." True to her word, my bank account was unfrozen by the end of the day. The money laundering investigation had been resolved with remarkable speed, once federal authorities started asking questions about how it had originated. That evening, I sat in my shop office thinking about how quickly things had changed. What started as a simple desire to correct false rumors had evolved into a federal investigation of corruption and abuse of power. The personal had become political, and the stakes had escalated beyond anything I'd imagined. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Coffee tomorrow? We need to talk. Kay." Kana wanted to meet. After weeks of lawyers and intermediaries, she was ready for direct communication. I texted back, "Samir's bar, 7 p.m., public place." Her response was immediate. "Fine." The next evening, I arrived at Samir's bar early and claimed a corner table where I could see the entrance. The place was busy with the usual crowd of working people unwinding after long days, the kind of honest atmosphere that would keep our conversation civil. Kina arrived exactly on time, looking smaller somehow than she had in our apartment. The expensive clothes and perfect makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes or the way she moved like someone carrying invisible weight. "You look terrible," I said as she sat down. "Thanks. Actually, you look good. Rested. Clean living." Samir brought her a wine without being asked, then retreated to give us privacy while staying close enough to intervene if necessary. "This has to stop," Kina said without preamble. "Which part?" "All of it. The website, the media attention, the federal investigation. It's destroying everything I've worked for. Should have thought about that before you started filing false complaints with city agencies." "I didn't file anything. That was Marcus and his people. I told them to handle the situation quietly." "By harassing me into silence? By making the problem go away. I never wanted it to escalate like this." I studied my ex-wife's face, looking for signs of deception. She seemed genuinely distressed, but whether that was remorse or just frustration at getting caught was harder to determine. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I want you to take down the website and stop talking to reporters." "In exchange for what?" "In exchange for me telling the truth about what happened. Publicly. On the record." "What truth?" "That I cheated on you. That I lied about it. That I asked you to pretend we were broken up so I could sleep with Jasper without technically cheating." "And the harassment campaign?" "I'll testify that I hired lawyers who acted without my knowledge or consent, that the investigation and inspections were initiated by people trying to protect me from consequences I deserved." It was a substantial offer, more than I'd expected. A public confession would vindicate everything I'd been saying and clear my name of the abuse allegations she'd been spreading. "Why now?" I asked. "Because the FBI is asking questions I can't answer. Because my career is over if this continues. Because I'm tired of lying." "Your career might be over anyway." "Probably, but at least I'll be able to sleep at night." We sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the background noise of conversations and clinking glasses. 7 years of marriage reduced to a negotiation in a bar, surrounded by strangers who had their own problems to worry about. "I'll need the confession in writing," I said finally. "I'll have my lawyer draft something tomorrow. Not Marcus, someone independent. I fired Marcus this morning. His tactics were making everything worse." "Good choice." "Rhett?" She reached across the table like she wanted to touch my hand, then stopped. "I really am sorry. Not just about getting caught, but about all of it. You deserved better." "Yes, I did." "Can you forgive me?" "Eventually, maybe, but not today." She nodded, accepting the honesty even if it wasn't what she'd hoped to hear. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Fix cars, mind my own business, try to remember what normal feels like." "And the website?" "Comes down after you make your statement. The story ends when the truth comes out." 2 days later, Kina held a press conference outside her former office building. She read a prepared statement, admitting to the affair, acknowledging her lies about my behavior, and apologizing for the harassment campaign that had been conducted on her behalf. My ex-husband's only crime was refusing to stay silent about my infidelity, she said, looking directly into the cameras. Everything that happened to him afterward was the result of my poor choices and the overzealous actions of people trying to protect me from consequences I deserved. The statement was covered by every major news outlet in the region. Social media erupted with commentary about accountability, truth, and the dangers of trying to silence inconvenient facts. Keena's confession became a viral moment, but not in the way she'd probably hoped. That evening, I took down the website. The final post was simple. The truth has been acknowledged. The story is complete. Thank you to everyone who supported the principle that facts matter more than power. Within hours, TheRealStory2024.com showed only a blank page where the documentation of our marriage's destruction had once lived. The next morning brought a call from Agent Williams. I wanted to let you know that our investigation is concluding, she said. We've identified several violations of federal law in the campaign against you. Will there be prosecutions? Some of the attorneys involved will face disciplinary action. A few government employees will lose their jobs. The private investigators who conducted surveillance will be fined. What about the people who hired them? That's more complicated. Your ex-wife's cooperation has been helpful in building cases against the others. So she gets immunity? She gets consideration for her cooperation, but her career in public relations is effectively over. Word travels fast in that industry. After the call ended, I sat in my shop thinking about justice and consequences. Keena had lost her career, her reputation, and her future in the industry she'd worked so hard to conquer. The people who'd tried to destroy me on her behalf were facing legal and professional consequences. The truth had been acknowledged and documented. It felt like enough. Mrs. Puck stopped by that afternoon with coffee and the satisfied expression of someone whose surveillance work had contributed to a successful mission. I saw the news conference, she said. Very impressive. Your wife looked properly ashamed. Ex-wife. Of course, dear. How are you feeling about everything? Tired. Ready to get back to normal. What's normal for you now? I gestured around the shop at the cars waiting for repair, the tools that needed organizing, the ordinary work that had sustained me through the chaos of the past few months. This, fixing things that are broken, making them work better than they did before. Sounds like a good life. It's an honest life. After Mrs. Puck left, I walked through my shop, taking inventory of everything that had survived the war. The tools were still sharp, the equipment still functional, the customer relationships still intact. I'd lost a marriage, but gained something more valuable: the knowledge that I could fight for the truth and win. The Mustang restoration was finally complete, its rebuilt engine purring with mechanical perfection. Tomorrow, I'd deliver it to the collector who'd commissioned the work, another project finished, and another satisfied customer added to my reputation. There would be other cars to fix, other problems to solve with patience and the right tools. The work would continue, honest and straightforward, in a way that human relationships rarely were. My phone buzzed with a text from Samir. Drink to celebrate? Celebrate what? I texted back. Surviving, winning, being done